All right, good morning, Icon Church. It's good to see all of you after a week of snow. I don't know how many of you guys just stayed inside or went out and played with the snow. I slipped on the ice once, so that's my story. But all right, before we begin, I would like to start with a time of prayer and just allow just all of us some time, just come before God and say, God, would you speak to me today? Now, Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight. God, our strength and our Redeemer in whom we trust, and all God's people said, amen. The year was 1998. My parents and I were living in Indianapolis, Indiana. Yes, there are Koreans living in Indianapolis, Indiana, all right? It was in the afternoon. School had just ended. I just got home and to our little tiny apartment. I was opening the door, and coming in, the picture that I saw in our apartment was something that my young eyes, elementary school eyes, had never seen. I saw my mom uncontrollably grieving, weeping, wailing on a phone because she had just found out that my grandmother in Korea had just passed away. And for me, you got to understand, I hadn't seen my grandma since I was 5 when I immigrated to the U.S., right? This was a couple of years later. And what I vaguely remember from my family in Korea is that it was completely dysfunctional. How many of you guys have that story? You've had a dysfunctional family background. And what I also remember is that my family in Korea, none of them knew Jesus. And so for years, we would pray asking God to finally change one of their hearts for one person, especially my grandma, who was my favorite, to come to know Jesus. And so we rejoiced because just 3 days before we found out my grandma actually came to believe in Jesus, she actually came to faith, and we were all so happy. But just 3 days after, we find out that my grandma passed away. And the reason being is because she got hit by a drunk driver, a hit and run, coming back from early morning prayer meeting. So what do you do with that as a kid? What do you do with this kind of contradiction? I thought even as a young child, if she became a Christian, if she believed in God, isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't good things happen? And yet there was a gap between my theology and my reality. Have any of you guys experienced that before? What you believe, your expectation of God and your experience with God is different. God, why would you allow my grandma to die? Why would you allow this to happen? Have any of you ever felt disappointed with God? Have any of you felt disappointed because your expectations of your theology didn't match the experience of your reality? Have any of you ever had a season where it was hard to see the beauty of God's goodness through the brutality of your life and the suffering that you're going through? Perhaps you too have experienced disappointment with God. Perhaps it's because of the loss of a dream. You had a dream, a goal, a thing that you had envisioned, the thing that you had asked God for, a job, finances to finally be able to provide for your family, a spouse, or whatever opportunity, and it just all crumbled. Or maybe you just got a little taste of it and then it just all went away. Perhaps you felt disappointed because you have a sickness that just won't go away. I have a friend who's been, for years after his stroke, he can't use his hand, and for 2 decades now, he's just been asking God, would you allow me to use my hand again? Or perhaps it's the loss of a loved one, someone, a father, a mother, God forbid, a child, who any parent, parents I would venture to say, I would swap places with any of my kids to die so that they could live. Have any of you ever felt disappointed with God because your theology didn't match your reality? And if you have experienced this before, the question I think we ask is why? Right? God, why would you allow this to happen? Or even just deeper, God, why should I trust you? Why should I trust you in the midst of my suffering? Or to put it another way, the main question I would like for us to wrestle with, and it's going to be a wrestle today. Sometimes it's good to wrestle. The main question I want us to wrestle with is, why should I trust in God when life hurts this much? Why should I trust in God when life hurts this much? We're going to work through the passage in John chapter 11. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to John chapter 11, and we're going to work through verses 17 through 44. And really, I'm just going to let the Bible do the talking. Is that okay? That's all right. John chapter 11, verse 17 through 44. As you turn there, I'll set the setting of the story by first looking at verse 17 through 19. So keep turning there, it's okay. But the story starts in this way. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem and about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Last week, Pastor TJ did a great job explaining the first 16 verses, and really it's a hard passage because there was no relief to the conflict, right? How to trust God in the waiting. So I won't spend that much time on the context here, but as a way of reminder, our passage today, in our passage, we have 3 siblings. We have Lazarus, the man who is sick and ill. We have Martha and Mary, siblings, a family who Jesus loved. And how do we know he loved? Because whenever he was tired, this is the people he wanted to hang out with. You guys have people like that? When you're tired, like this is the people I can be myself with, right? That was them. But as we saw in the first 16 verses, just because you are loved by Jesus doesn't mean that you are exempt from suffering. Just because you are his beloved doesn't mean that you won't go through pain in life. If you've ever wondered if God loves you, how would he allow this? He does love you, and yet we still go through this. We see in this story, Lazarus, the one who Jesus loved, the one who the sisters had asked Jesus to come and help, to heal, he has now died, and not only just died, but verse 17 tells us he's been dead for 4 days. Why is this a big deal? Why would John actually point out that it was 4 days? You see, in the Jewish tradition, they had a kind of a folk belief, a religious belief, that a soul, when a person died, a soul would hang around for 3 days. And so there was a chance, perhaps some hope for resuscitation over those 3 days. But if it's the 4th day, what would happen is that the body, the physical body, would start to decompose, right? And at that point, the soul would give up and leave. In other words, there was no hope. There was no chance for resurrection. In other words, Lazarus wasn't just dead, he was dead. You guys with me? That's what everyone would have thought about Lazarus. So can you imagine Martha and Mary being here? We had given you plenty of notice, Jesus, to come and help us out. Lazarus' name literally means the one who God helps. Well, where's God? Jesus didn't show up. Day after day, moment after moment, not even just in the moment when Lazarus died, but for 3 days after, they're going, maybe, but no. Have you ever tried giving God a deadline? We all laugh because it's true. You give God a deadline, he doesn't really follow it, does he? And have you ever felt in that deadline, the pressure of anxiety just start to rise because it's another day, God, the days are counting down, the moment is counting down, but God, where are you? Where are you, God? Mary and Martha have. They are in this moment. This is their story. But unlike what we expected from Lazarus' name, God, in their eyes, didn't help. And so Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Time's run out. Jesus was too late. Hope has expired. Can any of you relate to that? But in verse 17, Jesus, it says in the story, verse 17, not verse 1, Jesus, verse 17, right? That's a long passage, right? Verse 17, Jesus he's finally here, but in the eyes of others, he's too late. And this is where we start our story. And so as we continue in our story, we're going to explore 3 reasons you can trust in God even when life hurts. 3 reasons by seeing how Jesus relates to 3 people, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. That's what we're going to do. We're going to look at 3 ways Jesus responds to 3 different people to see 3 reasons why we can still trust him. Are y'all with me? So let's look at the first reason, starting from verse 20. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." The first person we see coming to have a conversation with Jesus about her disappointment is Martha. And here's 2 things that we see from Martha. First, we see that she honestly shares her disappointment with Jesus. She honestly shares her disappointment, right? She says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." In other words, you should have been here. Yes, it's true, Martha is making a statement of faith. I believe you could have healed him, but it's also true that she felt disappointed, right? She was honest about her feelings, her disappointment with Jesus. I think there is a popular kind of idea that we have today, and a false teaching, I believe, in popular Christianity today, that you can only share positive things to God about God. That you can only be, like that you have to, make sure everything is just positive and peaches and cream and whatever you want to call it, right? Everything is good, God. But that's not what we see here. Some of us believe that to be more honest with God is somehow less spiritual, but that's not what we see in terms of the scriptures. We see Job wrestling with God. We see Martha wrestling with Jesus. And that's okay. If God can handle your pain, he can handle also your disappointments. We see Martha honestly sharing her disappointment, but we also see at the same time, it doesn't end there, does it? We also see that she firmly holds on to her faith. She continues in verse 20 saying, "But even now, Jesus, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." So Martha's response doesn't just stop at honesty, it continues to resilience, perseverance, an even now kind of faith. How many of you guys in this room can honestly say that you have an even now kind of faith with Jesus? Do you have an even now kind of faith with Jesus, or do you have an if-then kind of faith with Jesus, relationship with Jesus? If, Jesus, you give me what I want, then I will believe you and do what you say. But what if Jesus doesn't? Even now, will you believe? Martha shows an even now kind of resolution in her relationship with Jesus, even when Jesus seemingly disappointed her. So how will Jesus respond to Martha? Verse 23, Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" So how do we see Jesus responding to Martha's expression of grief here? They go into an intellectual, theological, deep discussion about the nature of death and life. Do you see that? Now, on some glance in the room, like for some of us here in the room, at first glance, we might be like, Jesus, that kind of is a little insensitive, right? That's a little intellectual. We should do some art of care training for you, right? We should do some trauma training, right? It's a little cringeworthy on first glance. But what is Jesus doing here? See, what I love about Jesus is that he knows you by name. He knows every single thing about you. He knows your personality profile. He knows your whole story, right? Jesus is the ultimate pastor. And he knows how to speak to you and care for you uniquely in the way that you need. You see, Martha here, as we will discover, the way she processes grief is very, very different from her sister Mary. Mary is more the emotional, feeling-oriented one. Martha is the logical one, all right, as we will continue to see. And so when Martha is hit with a moment of trauma, her first response is to get logical. Jesus knows that Martha, and so he cares for her in the exact way she needs for her, right? For her sake. Do you have any siblings that are opposite of you? Right? My brother is the opposite of me. You will see. We look kind of similar, but we're both kind of tall. He's taller, which is sad because I'm older, but he's good at math. I'm not, right? He's good looking. I'm not, right? He makes a lot of money. I don't. So, it's just, we're very different, right? But Martha and Mary, this is their story too. Okay, so, but Jesus knows how to differentiate between the two, and he meets Martha exactly where she is. How she meets grief is with her mind. And so Jesus goes into a discussion with her and meets her there. Church, it's important as Christians for us to remember that, look, although everyone goes through the stages of grief in some way, that's as human beings, we all don't go through it in the same way, in the same manner. Although we all grieve and go through a process of grief, all of us also handle grief in a very different way. Jesus knew that. It's wise for us to also remember that. So Jesus meets Martha in her grief. How? By grounding and correcting Martha's reasoning of grief with truth. Do you guys see that? He gives her truth to anchor her hope in the midst of all the chaos around her. He gives her truth to anchor her hope. He declares, I, Martha, am the resurrection and the life. This brings us to the first reason we can trust God when life hurts, and it's because Jesus anchors our hope with his truth. Jesus anchors our hope with his truth. Jesus meets Martha and gives her an unshakable truth. In the moment of her suffering, he gives her truth to place her hope in. But what does Jesus' truth statement here practically mean for our lives? First implication it means, out of many, is that Jesus is God. You guys notice he says, I am the resurrection and the life. This is the fifth of 7 I am statements where Jesus clearly claims divinity. He clearly claims that he is God. He's not just a worker of miracles. He's not just a provider of good gifts. He is God himself. Do you believe that Jesus is God? A year ago, I spoke at UTD at a Muslim Christian kind of friendship event, and I spoke from this passage on John 11 about how Jesus claimed to be God, how it's in the text, and it got the imam really upset. Because this is a thing that differentiates Christianity from Islam, from Judaism, because we believe uniquely that Jesus is God. And if Jesus is God, Jesus changes everything. This is the truth that we believe. Some of us we profess to be Christian, but we are functionally Muslim. Because we don't treat Jesus as God, we treat him as a good teacher, as a moral example, as a provider of good gifts, as a prophet of God, but we don't actually believe that he is God. What do you really believe about Jesus? First implication is that Jesus is God. I am the resurrection and the life. Second, he says it means that Jesus doesn't give life. He is life. You guys notice this? He doesn't just give and provide life. He says, I am the life. I am the resurrection. Notice he doesn't make any comments here about providing or giving. He says, this is who I am. Not only for life in the future and the resurrection after death, but life today in the present. He says, I am the life current and the resurrection future. Do you believe that Jesus is life, church? Or are you seeking life from other sources and other springs? Sometimes I feel like when I'm praying to God, I'm just asking God for other sources of life. God, would you give me a nice vacation so I can really rest? God, would you give me more money? God, would you give me more time? No, what if you pray, God, I want more of you. Jesus, I want more of you. How would it radically change the way you spend your time with God if you see it less as a task to be completed and more as time to recharge with him in his presence? Because Jesus is life. The life that you are thirsting for, where your soul is parched, that is from Jesus alone. Jesus is life. First reason is because the reason we can trust God even when life hurts is because Jesus anchors our hope with his truth. So then how do we respond? What do we do with this fact? Martha gives us an example in verse 27 when she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." How does Martha respond to Jesus' truth? I believe. Even now, I believe. Even in all my disappointments, I believe in you, Jesus. Church, is this true of us? Do you believe even now, or do you give God the cold shoulder, the silent treatment, or even try to run away, or do things that you know are going to hurt him? Do you truly believe, not just intellectually, but with your life, with all of your being, that Jesus is who he says he is, even when he doesn't follow your agenda? Let's move now to the second reason we can trust God. This is a little bit longer, verse 28. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." When she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews were in the house consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? After Martha, we see the second person who expresses her disappointment with Jesus is Mary. Like Martha, she's honest about her feelings, isn't she? She says, "Lord, if you had been here, he would not have died." But what we see is that Mary is very different from Martha. Unlike Martha, she doesn't use very many words here, does she? She says what she needs to say, but her heart, the way that she expresses herself is with deep emotion-filled action. She falls at Jesus' feet. Do you guys see that? It repeats over and over again. She weeps, and she weeps, which causes everyone else to also weep with her, including Jesus himself. So how does then Jesus respond to Mary? Does he get super rational and logical and theological with her? No. Does he tell Mary, "Stop it. Stop being emotional. Suppress your feelings. Your feelings don't matter"? Or does Jesus give the usual sympathetic line, the trite thing, "Oh, I hope you feel better soon. I'm sorry for your loss"? Or what does Jesus do when he comes and experiences Mary's grief? How does he respond? We see Jesus responds to Mary's grief by grieving himself. He also grieves with her. He shares in her grief, doesn't he? The text tells us that when Jesus saw Mary weeping, he is deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. These are emotional-filled words. Do you guys get that? He is deeply moved in his spirit. In the Greek was used of a loud snorting noises of horses that were angry, indignant, rebuking. Jesus was angry. He was indignant. Jesus has feelings. How many of you guys know Jesus has feelings? He's not happy all the time. He was angry to where it was a loud noise coming from Jesus. When you think of Jesus, do you see him as an emotionless, distant observer of your pain, or do you see him as an intimate friend who is right there with you? Jesus, look how he responds. He is deeply moved, greatly troubled. And next it says that Jesus wept upon coming to the tomb. He wept. Imagine Jesus, the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, the creator of the cosmos, of humanity. God himself wept real tears. Real grown man tears. And no, this is not like, some of you guys, when you're watching a movie and you're trying to hide, you're watching a rom-com and you're like, no, I'm not crying. I'm good. It's not that. This is loud wailing and weeping where everyone else around Jesus all knew. Look how he loved him. Look how he is weeping. But what was Jesus weeping about, though? Didn't Jesus know the outcome already? Like, Jesus knew he had the power to resurrect the dead. Jesus knew what was going to happen. Jesus knew the end of the story already. Jesus knew he could solve the problem, and yet Jesus weeps. He doesn't turn around and say, chill everyone, I got it. Or if you just do this, let me solve your problem. No, he weeps publicly, fiercely. Jesus weeps. Why? Because Jesus knew that what his people really needed was not just a God who could solve their grief, but a God who could share their grief, who could feel their grief. Not just pity intellectually from a distance, but compassion, empathy up close. Jesus is a God who actually joins and shares in our grief. Every moment of our lives when we are grieving, suffering, Jesus is not far from you. He is right there next to you, grieving along with you. This brings us to the second reason why we can trust in God even when life hurts. The second reason is because Jesus shares our pain with his compassion. Jesus shares our pain with his compassion. Some of you guys know that Jesus wept, these two words, this is considered by many to be the shortest verse of the Bible. Short 2 words, Jesus wept, but it is potent with life-changing implications. Let me list a few real quickly. Because Jesus wept, first implication, your emotions matter to God, and you're not less whatever for showing them. Does that make sense? Your emotions matter to God, and you're not less. I think there's a popular belief, especially among men, you are less than manly if you cry. Jesus, the manliest of all men, right? Is there a person you would put better than Jesus? And yet he weeps grown man tears. Are you going to tell me that Jesus is less manly because he cried? No. You are not less woman or less man for crying. You are actually more human. And Jesus shows us, he models for us that it's okay to share your emotions, to express your feelings. Second implication is that God is not apathetic, he's empathetic. Do you guys see that? God's not apathetic, he's empathetic. The Greek version of God in this day was he was a distant, apathetic God. Even today, many religions don't see God as someone a being who can feel your pain. They understand it, but they are far from you. But Jesus is not apathetic, he's empathetic. Jesus not only weeps, but the scriptures tell us he is a man of sorrow who's well acquainted with all of our grief, all of our sorrows, all of our pain, and that changes everything. Third implication is that you are never alone, even in the worst moments and seasons of suffering. You are never alone. How profound is it that when Mary weeps, Jesus weeps? That he shares in the grief of his people. How amazing is that truth? I think one of the worst things about suffering is when you feel like your suffering is causing you to be alone. Ever live life a little bit? When you suffer, you feel alone. But Jesus weeping shows us you are never alone. You will not be alone. Even when there's no one else around you, even to your very last breath. Let's move now to the third reason why we can trust God. And by looking at how Jesus now responds to Lazarus, read with me, and we're going to work through the text. Verse 38. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." I love how the King James Version puts it. He stinketh, Lord. Lord, he stinketh. This is Martha, again, the logical one. It's like 4 days, decompose, whatever, right? Like that's how she was processing it, right? Verse 40, Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Notice the tense, you have heard me. What was Jesus doing in the waiting? What was Jesus doing? Was he just waiting for this moment? Was this for his first time praying for Lazarus? No, he's been praying for Lazarus the entire time. He says, "Father, thank you that all this time you've heard me, and even now you hear me." We have to remember, even when God has not answered your prayer in the way that you expected, Jesus is interceding, praying for you on your behalf through all the suffering. Verse 42, "I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you have sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" For those of you who are falling asleep. The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." So how does Jesus ultimately respond to Lazarus' suffering and the sister's grief and disappointment? How does Jesus respond? By resurrecting a dead man, right? By resurrecting Lazarus from the dead. Because Jesus truly is who he says he is, because he is the resurrection and the life, he raises Lazarus from the dead as the greatest evidence and sign of his legitimacy, his credibility. I am who I said I am. I am life. And with these 3 words, Lazarus, come out. 3 simple words, he changes everything. With all authority, all power. Lazarus, come out. There will be a day, church, no matter how much we suffer in this life, there will be a day when Jesus returns and he said he will, with simple words just like this, come out. When the dead will be raised back to life, when resurrection will happen, and at that point there will be no more death, no more sorrow, no more pain. Imagine being there, Martha and Mary, watching all of this. Can you imagine? This is better than any movie or film you might have seen. Your brother who died, who you were like 4 days, it's over. He comes out of the grave. You can touch him. He stinketh, but you can hug him. Can you imagine being them? Some of you guys in this room right now who are grieving the loss of a loved one, your father, your child. Can you imagine them coming out of the grave and you being able to hold them, to touch them? It's not the end. With Jesus, hope doesn't have an expiration date. With Jesus, it's never over. Death is only a new beginning. This leads us to the third and final reason why we can trust God when life hurts. And it's because Jesus redeems our suffering with his power. Jesus redeems our suffering with his power. Notice the word redeem. Why did we, I know I picked it, but why did I pick the word redeem? is because redeeming our suffering means that there's a cost to pay. To redeem something means that you have to be willing to pay the cost for it. You see, in this case, Jesus knew that in order to give Lazarus life, he would have to pay the cost of redemption by his own death. And in the rest of the story, which I don't have time to unpack today, in John chapter 11, verses 45 to 57, we see that although some people come to believe in Jesus, Lazarus' resurrection becomes the nail in the coffin for Jesus. Because the others, the religious leaders, say, we have to kill this guy. This guy can't live. The next time we see him, he's going to die. Jesus knew this. To raise Lazarus from the dead meant that Jesus had to choose to die. So why would you choose to die for a person who's already dead? Because of love. Because Jesus loved. Jesus says in John chapter 15, verse 13, greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends. I love that we worship a Savior who doesn't just tell us this, he shows us this. Greater love has no one than this, and Jesus says, and I'm going to show you. This is exactly what Jesus did for Lazarus. But church, this is not what he just did for Lazarus. This is what he also did for us. In Romans chapter 5, verse 8, the Apostle Paul tells us, but God shows us his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, still in all of your mess, you still didn't earn it, you weren't good enough, you didn't fix yourself up, but still in all of your mess, while you were still a sinner, Jesus died for you. Why? Out of love. And if you remember nothing else I say today, it's this. If Jesus loved you enough to die for you, don't you think that he's worth trusting and believing? Even in your moments where you feel disappointed, even in your moments of suffering, don't you think that a man who loved you enough to die for you is worth trusting? Jesus loved you, church. Loved you enough to die for you. And I don't know what you're going through right now. I don't know what your season is right now. But what I know is that Jesus truly does love you, not with cheap words or a Valentine's Day card, but with his very life. So as we close today, why should I trust in God when life hurts this much? Because Jesus anchors our hope with his truth. Because Jesus shares our pain with his compassion. And because Jesus redeems our suffering with his power. These are the three reasons we see just in John chapter 11 alone. So where are you? If you find yourself in a season of suffering right now, life hurts even more than words can describe. That's okay. I'm glad you're here. But what I want to ask you today is, would you believe in Jesus and receive his love today? Would you say yes to his compassion? Would you say yes to his truth? Would you say yes to his power today? Just come before him today and honestly share your feelings with God. When's the last time you honestly shared your feelings with God? Not just the good stuff, but the ugly stuff. Would you do that today? And not just do that, we would be honored. People here in this church, we say, this is not a show to attend, it's a family you love, and we want to come alongside you in prayer. Weakness, vulnerability is something we celebrate here at this church because Jesus is our strength. All of us are in need of grace. The second thing for Christians today, you might not be going through a season of suffering, just wait. All of us at some point do. But how could you share in the suffering of others with compassion, just as Jesus did. If you are not in a moment, a season of suffering right now, how could you share in the sufferings of others, just as Jesus did? The Bible commands believers, all believers, to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. Weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn. When it comes to suffering and grief, truth is important, but truth alone is not enough. Compassion, love, care is required of us, church. So instead of trying to solve other people's sufferings, just doing that, what would it look like for you to share in their sufferings today? To love even when it's not comfortable, when it's inconvenient. So as we close today, I wanted to invite us to do what Jesus modeled for us, to share in the suffering of others. So today, if that's you, if you're like, man, I'm going through some hardship right now, get honest before God. Or maybe you're like, I don't even have the strength to pray for myself, then would you allow someone else to just pray for you? But today, could we respond in a time of prayer where all of us experience the comfort that only God provides? At this time, respond however you feel necessary. Get before the Lord.